They said she threw her life away on the day she married a mountain man. Folks in Maple Hollow talked like they always did, with their elbows on the counter and their noses in someone else's business. They said it quiet when she walked past in her plain blue dress, but loud enough that the words still reached her back. Evelyn Hart did not look like a woman who belonged to a cabin on the mountain. She was a seamstress, and it showed in every neat stitch of her own clothes. Her dark hair was always braided and pinned with care. Her hands were slim and quick with a needle. She had grown up behind a shop window on Main Street, watching other people's dresses turn and sway as they walked by. The shop had been her mother's pride and her father's worry. When they died within the same bitter winter, it became Evelyn's battle alone. By the time she turned 33, the town had already decided she had missed her chance. Too busy sewing hems and letting out waists, too busy paying off the last of her parents' debts. Suitors had come and gone years before. A clerk from the mercantile, a widower farmer with 2 restless boys. Evelyn had smiled, poured coffee, politely refused. She told herself she was content with fabric and quiet. On most days, she almost believed it. Then a stranger came down from the mountain. He walked into her shop on an afternoon when the sky over Maple Hollow looked like it might finally give up its reign. He ducked slightly at the doorframe out of habit. He wore a plain wool shirt and a coat that had seen too many winters. His boots were clean but scarred. His jaw was shadowed with 2 days of growth. Nothing about him said town man. Everything about him said distance and weather and work. "Ma'am," he said in a low, steady tone, "I was told you were the one to see if a man needs something to last." He laid a folded, worn shirt on the counter. The cuffs were frayed. The seams around the shoulders had pulled loose. Evelyn's fingers went to the cloth as if they had a mind of their own. "I make dresses," she answered, "but I suppose I can keep a shirt from falling apart." She meant it to sound light. It did not. There was something in the way he watched her hands that made her aware of every breath. His name was Elias Boone. He lived 3 hours up the ridge in a cabin that people in town only spoke about when haying was done and the whiskey was cheap. Some called him a trapper. Some said he cut timber. Some said he had gone to war and come back broken in ways you could not see. Evelyn did not ask. She stitched his shirt in silence while he sat in the corner chair, hat in his hands, eyes on the rain that finally began tapping at the window. That first day he paid her with coins that were too clean for a man in such worn boots. He thanked her with a small nod and left. 2 weeks later, he came back, this time with a coat that needed lining, then with a pair of heavy trousers that needed patching, then with nothing at all, just a quiet question. "Do you ever sew for yourself, Miss Hart, or only for others?" The town noticed, of course. They saw the tall mountain man come down every few weeks, bringing game to the butcher and repairs to the blacksmith, and always stopping last at Evelyn Hart's dress shop. They saw how she began to close the curtains when he was there, how she saved the last of the lamp oil for those evenings when she worked late on something no one else ever wore. When the rumors started, they were small. A raised brow at the church social, a whisper over the pickle jars. By the time summer turned the valley grass to gold, people had already written the ending in their minds. The seamstress was lonely. The mountain man was rough. It was shame, they said, for a decent woman to waste herself on a man who slept closer to coyotes than to pews. The day Evelyn told the town she was going to marry Elias Boone, the sky over Maple Hollow was bright and clear. The same could not be said for the looks in the room. The wedding was small and quiet. No grand church, no long aisle, no choir. Just the pastor, 2 witnesses from town who came more out of curiosity than affection, and Evelyn, in a simple cream dress she had sewn herself. Elias wore the mended shirt she had saved from falling apart. When the pastor asked the usual questions, she answered without hesitation. Her voice did not tremble. If anyone in the back muttered that she could still change her mind, she did not turn to hear it. Afterward, there was no reception, only a few dry cookies on a plate in the church kitchen and a tight little smile from the pastor's wife. Most folks did not even bother to hide their opinion. They said Evelyn Hart had married beneath her. They said she had thrown her life away on a man who lived closer to pine trees than to people. They shook their heads and went back to their own homes, their own worries, their own quiet disappointments. Evelyn locked the door of the dress shop that evening and slid the key into Elias's calloused hand. That key had been her protection for years. It had also been her prison. The shop windows still held the reflections of dresses she would never finish now. Orders she had turned away once the date was set. There were whispers that she could have married a banker if she had waited. A man with polished boots, a man with soft hands, a man with clean ledgers and a wide porch. You and I know how those stories grow in small towns, my friend. They grow faster than beans in a good summer and twice as twisted. Evelyn heard the words through the glass as they walked past, arm in arm, toward the edge of Maple Hollow. She lifted her chin a little higher. Elias said very little. When they reached the last house at the end of the lane, he paused and looked back only once, as if measuring the distance between the life she had known and the one he was asking her to choose. The trail up the ridge was a different kind of world. Trees closed in over their heads and turned the late afternoon light to green. The road narrowed, then vanished into a path that only a careful eye could follow. Elias walked ahead with steady steps, leading the small wagon that carried her trunk, her sewing machine, and a wooden box of things she could not bear to leave. A chipped teacup of her mother's, a spool of blue thread her father had brought from the city years ago. She was not a woman given to wild feelings, yet with each turn of the trail, she felt something in her chest loosen and something else tighten. The town was falling away behind them. So were the safe walls. So were the eyes. Up here, the only witnesses were the pines and the crows. His cabin appeared at last on a shoulder of the mountain, half hidden by spruce. It was not pretty, not the way houses in town tried to be. The roof sagged a little. The porch boards were worn. There was a stack of cut wood by the door and a line of simple tools under the eaves. Yet the place was solid. The logs were thick and well joined. The chimney stone was carefully laid. When Evelyn stepped inside, she smelled smoke, iron, and something else she did not expect. Soap, clean floors, a bed neatly made with a wool blanket, a corner where a table stood with a single chair and a folded newspaper on top. She had been ready to face filth and carelessness. Instead, she found a room that looked like a man had tried, with limited skill, to make order out of long loneliness. In those first weeks, Evelyn learned what the town could never see from their windows. Life with a mountain man was not a romantic story, and not a tragedy either. It was work from first light to the last glow of the stove. She learned how to tend the small garden behind the cabin, where onions and beans pushed up through stubborn soil. She learned how to keep bread from failing in the thin air. She learned to listen for the change in wind that meant a storm rolling down from higher peaks. At night, she sat by the fire with her sewing basket and mended Elias's shirts, then her own, then little things around the cabin that had waited years for careful hands. He never spoke much, but when he did, it was plain and honest. Now and then she would catch him watching her while she worked, with a look that held both gratitude and something like awe, as if he could not quite believe that a woman from a shop window now sat in his rough wooden chair. Down in Maple Hollow, they said she had chosen hardship over comfort. Up in the cabin, as autumn crept in and the first frost silvered the grass, Evelyn began to suspect she had chosen something else entirely. Winter came early on the ridge that year. Frost crawled up the cabin windows before the leaves had even finished falling. Down in Maple Hollow, people said it was a sign. They said the cold always came harder to folks who made foolish choices. They did not say her name out loud if she walked into the general store. They did not need to. A slight turn of the head. A little pause in conversation. It was enough. Evelyn felt it every time she came down with a basket of mending for Mrs. Porter or a sack of flour to carry back up the hill. She would pay, give a small nod, and step out again into the thin mountain light. Behind her, she could almost hear it. There goes the woman who married a nobody. Up at the cabin, life did not leave much room for fretting. Elias rose before daylight and slipped out without ceremony. Sometimes he carried only his rifle and a coil of rope. Sometimes he had a leather satchel that never left his shoulder. He would be gone till late afternoon. When he came back, his shoulders were tired and his hands stained with dust or sap. He never complained. He would stack wood, wash at the pump, and sit down at the rough table as if the long day was nothing more than a fact. Evelyn did not press him with questions he did not offer. That was something she had learned in the dress shop. People speak when they have a place to put their words. So she began to give him small places. A cup of hot coffee set in front of him. A quiet remark about the sky or the way the wind had changed. Now and then he would answer with more than a nod. On days when snow pinned them in and the world narrowed to the circle of firelight, Elias showed her the lines of the ridge on an old hand-drawn map. His finger traced paths and creek beds as if he knew every turn in the dark. There were marks she did not understand. Small crosses, notes in a steady hand. Once she saw a name in the margin. Thorne and Wilder Mining Company. The words meant nothing to her then. It was only one more piece of a man she was still learning. Her own hands were never idle. Word traveled slow but sure up and down the mountain trails. There was a woman up with Elias Boone who could take in a coat and make it fit better than new. A woman who could turn a worn dress into something worth wearing to a Christmas service. Soon, hunters began to appear at the door with torn sleeves and ripped pockets. A shy girl brought her only good skirt that had been caught on a nail in the barn. Evelyn laid each piece out on the table and studied it like a puzzle. There was a joy in that work no one in town had ever understood. It was not just about neat seams, it was about giving people back something they had thought was lost. Elias watched her while pretending not to. He built her a wide work table out of planed pine and set it under the best window. He carved a small box for her pins. One night he came in with a bundle wrapped in canvas and set it down beside her chair. Inside was a treadle for her sewing machine. Old but solid. He had hauled the iron piece up the mountain on his back. She ran her fingers over the worn pedal and felt her throat tighten. It meant less strain on her hands. It meant she could do more work and lift her eyes from the needle once in a while and just breathe. As the snow deepened, trouble also settled over Maple Hollow. The sawmill ran short of orders. The owner began paying late. Then, not at all. The little bank on the corner started closing its doors early. Men went home with tight faces and silent mouths. Women came into the store with coins counted twice. The same voices that had once mocked Evelyn now grew sharp from fear. It was always easier to point to someone else than to look straight at the empty shelves. Every few weeks, Elias would hitch the mule and say he had business in town beyond buying salt and coffee. He would put on the one good coat he owned and leave after breakfast. He always went to the same place first. The bank. He never told her that, but Mrs. Porter did, because nothing stayed secret long in Maple Hollow. Folks noticed the simple mountain man who walked into the bank manager's office and closed the door behind him. They noticed how the manager's voice took on a new tone when he spoke to Elias Boone. Less smooth, more careful. Evelyn heard the talk when she came down with her mending. She folded it away in her mind and did not show on her face what she felt inside. Curiosity, a small spark of worry, a larger wave of something like respect. The man who shared her table was not as simple as they called him. In the quiet of the cabin one night, she found more proof. She was pulling a loose board near the stove to sweep away the ash that slipped under. Under the board lay a small iron box, unlocked. Inside were folded papers, seals, old letters, a deed with Elias's name written in careful ink. Beside words, she sounded out slowly. Mineral rights, land grants, interest held in trust. She put everything back exactly as she had found it. She did not mention it. She did not sleep easily that night either. She lay awake listening to his slow breathing and to the wind pressing against the walls. She wondered who exactly she had married. A man who carried his pain in silence. A man the town called simple. A man who walked in and out of the only bank that had not yet closed its doors. Down below, Maple Hollow was shivering over lost wages and empty ledgers. Up on the ridge, a woman with a needle and a man with old papers were standing without quite knowing it at the edge of a change that would reach farther than their own roof. Spring climbed the mountain in quiet stages. First the snow thinned to gray patches in the shade. Then the creek broke free and began to talk again over its own stones. Tiny green tips pushed through last year's dead grass. Evelyn opened the cabin windows one afternoon and let the thawed air drift through. It carried the smell of wet earth and pine and something else too. Change. Her sewing grew along with the season. She no longer waited for work to find her. She pinned a small scrap of muslin to the post at the crossroads where the trail split toward town. On it she stitched 3 simple words in dark thread: mending and dressmaking. Folks who might have hesitated to knock on Elias Boone's door out of curiosity had fewer qualms when it came to saving a favorite coat. Soon there was a steady trickle of people making the climb. A logger with a ripped wool jacket. A widow with her late husband's shirt she wanted cut down for her boy. A girl holding a bundle wrapped in an old shawl, eyes full of hope and embarrassment. Inside was a dress 3 sizes too big that someone had given her out of charity. Evelyn measured, cut, and shaped until the cloth knew the girl's body instead of hiding it. When the child saw herself in the small mirror Evelyn kept on a shelf, her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes shone in a way that had nothing to do with lace and everything to do with being seen. Word of that kind of magic spreads faster than scandal. Even so, the old judgments did not vanish. They only took on a new flavor. In the store, women said things like, "It is a shame she wastes such fine stitches on that rough cabin." Or if she had married a man with sense, she could have had a shop right here on Main Street. They said it while handing over coins for the hems she had sewn and the seams she had strengthened. Sometimes Mrs. Porter would look at them with one of her thin smiles and say, "Only thing I see wasted is your breath." But she kept that for days when her patience was long. Elias kept his own pace beside hers. He repaired fences for neighbors who never quite met his eye. He helped pull a wagon out of the ditch one rainy market day and did not linger afterward for thanks. He started carrying a ledger in his satchel on his trips to town. At night, Evelyn saw him at the table after supper, shoulders bent over the pages, lips moving silently as he added columns of numbers. The lamplight showed more gray at his temples than she had first noticed. It also caught the set of his jaw when he was thinking hard. Late one evening, when she had finished the last stitch in a wedding dress for a girl down in the valley, she found him still sitting there. The ledger lay open, Behind it, those deeds and letters she had seen once were spread out in careful rows. She stood quietly beside the table for a moment. He tapped one page with a blunt finger. His voice was steady when he spoke, but she could hear the weight behind it. "I thought those claims were worth nothing," he said. "My father did too toward the end. Men came through years back, said they had bigger operations farther west, said this ground was played out. He held on anyway. I let the papers sit after he died, could not bear to look at them. But the bank has different ideas now." She sat across from him and folded her hands, letting him find his own way through the telling. "You know that mine half a day's ride north," he went on. "The one that shut down when the company pulled out. Turns out they never bought all the rights up here. They only leased part. The rest stayed with small holders, men who worked a strip of rock when they had the strength. My father was one. These papers say his share passed to me." The words were simple. The meaning was not. Evelyn felt the room tilt a little. "But I thought there was no ore left," she said. "So did they. They were wrong." His eyes met hers. "There is a new vein, deeper. A young surveyor working for the bank found it by accident last winter. They want to move fast, but they need every title clear to keep outside buyers from stepping in. That is why the manager has been so eager to see me behind his door." He told her then what he had not told anyone else. The bank had offered to buy him out for a price that would have made any working man dizzy. Enough to build a new house. Enough to buy a store outright. Enough to leave the mountain if he wished. He had not said yes. He had not said no. He had asked for time. "Money like that sounds clean when you say the number," he said. "But it comes with strings. They want the water rights too. They want to run more wagons through the hollow. Noise. Strangers. Men who treat the ridge like a thing to be stripped. I have seen that before. I swore I would not see it again if I could help it." Evelyn listened. She thought of the quiet mornings on the porch with a cup between her hands, the sound of wind in the pines, the way moonlight lay on the creek when all the world felt held in one gentle curve. She also thought of the fear in town faces when another shop closed its doors, children in coats too thin, men pretending not to mind holes in their boots. "What if," she said slowly, "it did not have to be one or the other? What if there is a way to let some of that wealth come here without letting it take everything with it?" He watched her with that deep, steady look she had come to know. "You see roads when other people see walls," he said. "That is why I told you before I told any man in town. If I decide alone, I might protect the ridge and leave Maple Hollow to sink. Or I might save the hollow and lose the ridge I love. I do not want to choose wrong. Not for my own pride. Not again." The again hung between them. She knew it had something to do with the guilt he carried for his father's last years. For staying away from town when the older man had grown too stubborn to ask for help. For watching a mine die and believing it was the end of any future tied to that ground. They sat in that circle of lamplight and spoke in low voices until the flame burned down. They sketched ideas on scrap paper, a smaller operation with strict limits, local men only, clear shares, a portion set aside for the town school and for widows in winter. Enough pulled from the mountain to lift lives, but not so much that it tore out the heart of the place. She saw his shoulders ease little by little as they talked. It was not that the decision became light. It was that it no longer rested on him alone. Outside, down below, Maple Hollow lay under the same stars, worried and waiting without knowing it. Some men had begun to drink more. Some women had started cutting old dresses into children's coats. The banker lay awake too, thinking of investors in bigger cities and the chance to save his failing books. None of them had the full picture yet. None of them knew that up on the ridge the woman they had judged and the man they had dismissed were shaping the terms of the chance that would soon knock on every door. 2 days later, that knock came to theirs first. It arrived in the form of a black carriage pulled by a matched pair of bays and followed by a dust-covered wagon with the bank's mark on its side. When Elias stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, he found the manager of Maple Hollow Bank and 2 other men in town coats at his gate. They looked up at the cabin and at the line of wash fluttering nearby, at the woodpile stacked neat, at the woman who had come to stand quietly in the doorway behind him. The banker cleared his throat and tried on his most polished smile. "Mr. Boone," he said, "we have come with a proposition. I believe it will be of great interest to you and to the town." Elias did not answer right away. He felt Evelyn's calm presence at his back like a steady hand. He thought of his father's worn face, of the empty mine, of hungry children in Maple Hollow, of the quiet of the ridge. Then he stepped down from the porch and opened the gate. "Then let us talk," he said. "But this time we will do it my way." The banker had never looked so out of place as he did, standing in the yard of that mountain cabin, with dust on his polished boots. He laid out the offer in careful words. A full purchase of Elias Boone's mineral rights, a fast payment. Outside investors ready to bring in machines and men. Big money. Quick money. Money that would leave Maple Hollow with more noise than hope when the ore ran out again. Elias listened without interrupting. Evelyn stood just inside the doorway, hands resting on the frame, eyes calm. When the banker finished, there was a long quiet. Birds called in the pines. The creek down below kept on talking to itself. Elias finally shook his head. He did not raise his voice. He did not sound angry. He simply said no. Then he laid his own terms on the table. The mine would open again, but as a small company owned in part by the people who worked it. The bank would hold a share to keep its doors open. The town would have a written claim to a fixed part of the profits for its school and for families hit hardest by hard winters. No outside machine crew tearing up the land for a quick gain. Local men only. Strict limits on how deep and how fast they cut into the hill. Respect for the ridge that had held him all his life. The banker sputtered at first. It was not how business was done. Not in bigger places. Not with men who had no schooling beyond what the mountains gave them. But Elias had one thing the bank did not. He had the one set of papers they needed. And he had all the time in the world. In the end, the black-coated men climbed back into their carriage with faces tight and thoughtful, and a draft contract tucked in the banker's leather case. A month later, the first careful crews went up to the old mine. Not strangers in fine hats. Men from Maple Hollow with tired hands and wary hope. They found the new vein where the surveyor had said it would be. Rock that glittered where the lamplight touched. Not the kind that turned a place into a frenzy overnight, but rich enough to matter. Pay envelopes grew a little heavier. The sawmill stayed open. The bank stopped closing early. A fund, quiet as a kitchen drawer, began to fill for widows and for children who needed shoes. Word spread faster than the money. People in town learned in bits and pieces what had happened. They learned that the simple mountain man had turned down an offer that would have made him rich far beyond Maple Hollow. They learned that he had tied his gain to theirs so that if the ridge prospered, so did the hollow. And they learned another thing that stung even more than pride. The first person he had told about all of it had not been any of them. It had been the seamstress they had mocked. One Sunday after church, Evelyn came down the steps with her shawl drawn close. Conversations hushed as usual, then did not pick up in the same way. Mrs. Porter walked beside her like a small guard with sharp eyes. Halfway down Main Street, one of the women who had talked the loudest stepped into her path. Her gloved hands twisted around the handle of her parasol. Her voice came out thin. "Mrs. Boone, I hear your husband has done a great deal for this town." Evelyn could have said many things. She could have spoken of the nights they had gone over numbers until the lamp burned low, of the fear that maybe the vein would not be as rich as promised, of the risk they had taken tying their own future so tightly to a place that had never claimed her as its own. Instead, she only said it was the ridge that had done it, and that they were only trying to be good stewards. The woman nodded too quickly. Others gathered. A man cleared his throat and said the town was grateful. Someone else mentioned how fine the stitching on his wife's new dress was, and how folks from 2 valleys over were now asking who had sewn it. Gratitude and curiosity and something like shame moved through that little crowd like a slow wind. Later, back at the cabin, Evelyn told Elias about it. She did not tell it as a triumph, just as a fact that sat between them with the evening light. He listened, then gave one of his rare half-smiles. "Let them talk," he said. "They have to put their astonishment somewhere. Might as well be in your doorway instead of behind your back." Life did not turn into a storybook after the mine reopened. There were still late frosts and sick calves and arguments at the town meetings over how to spend the new money. Some seams ran thinner than expected. Some men drank more than they should on payday. But there were also small changes that did not make it into ledgers. Children with books bought from a fund that no one rich in a far city controlled. Widows who found an envelope on their step before the first snow. A town that slowly, grudgingly, learned that worth does not always wear the clothes it expects. Years later, when folks told the story, they liked to start with the sharp line. They said she had thrown her life away to marry a mountain man. Then they laughed and shook their heads and pointed to the brick school and to the bank that had never closed and to the little sewing room on Main Street with its big front window and its sign that read Boone and Wife, Tailoring and Dressmaking. Inside that window, a woman with steady hands would sometimes pause at her work, lift her eyes to the ridge, and smile in a quiet way that said she would have chosen the same rough cabin and the same quiet man, even if no fortune had ever been hiding under that mountain at all. If you stayed with this story to the very end, my dear friend, thank you for spending this time in Maple Hollow with me. If you would like to hear more gentle tales of Western love and second chances, remember to subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from, so we can bring you more stories that keep you company in the evenings.